You are listening to Philip Malaka's Consciousness Evolution. I'm Philip Malaka. Today's column is entitled Participating in the Shift, Traumas and Triumphs, Comedy and Tragedy. The shift will make fools of us all. When I begin to glimpse the enormity of the changes in store for us as a result of the shift, I have to believe that we won't know what hit us. Never before in human history has this type of expansion of the blueprint of physical reality occurred. This master source event is quite simply the most dramatic, all-encompassing, hold-on-to-your-socks roller coaster ride since the light bulb turned on and physical reality was a go. Nothing like this, ever. I don't use qualifiers like always and never very often, but when I do, I mean it. There has never been a change of this kind and to this extent in our history. We are all so convinced of the limited nature of our experience that it is almost impossible for us to perceive anything different, to see past the camouflage and the amnesia and find ourselves as we really are. When the reality of this shift becomes apparent and we realize how we are all interconnected, it's going to be like a 5 a.m. walk of shame home after a one-night stand. There will be trauma when we discover how we have treated ourselves and each other like enemies, not beloved partisans on a mutual voyage. When we all have to face up to how we have acted in our ignorance and naivety, it's going to generate a great deal of personal pain. When we see how our own traumatic experiences in life as victims led us all to then become perpetrators of the same kinds of trauma upon others. There will be denial, disbelief, shame, tears. When people talk about justice for those who have done wrong, I can tell you that there is no externally generated punishment that can match the pain that we will face through our own realizations and memories. I know. I have been going through this process for a number of years now. I still relive cringeworthy moments every single day. Therapy may help some, but every single one of us will have to open our vaults, the things we don't look at, don't talk about, and don't admit to ourselves. This is the trauma associated with the shift. Many people will just die as opposed to facing down their lives. Altogether, not a terrible choice in many cases, rather than facing this trauma in this focus. But even that is only a temporary reprieve. In that sense, we will all pay the piper somehow at some point, whether it's in this life or not. Those of us who choose to stick around will undergo a process of forgiveness and acceptance, not primarily of others, but of ourselves. Because ultimately, non-acceptance of others boils down to aspects of ourselves that we do not accept. It is interesting how our religions have shaped up our end of life. In Christianity, we have a judgment day with God and St. Peter at the pearly gates to ascertain our performance in our lives and determine if we are fit to go to heaven, and Satan in a fiery hell to mete out punishment when we don't measure up to heaven's guidelines. I can tell you that no punishment by a malevolent God or an evil Satan can ever match the pain and trauma that we will generate ourselves unto ourselves. No humility or shame can ever be heaped on us that will rival our own when we realize that in victimhood, we then became perpetrators. I realize that I'm not making any friends here or giving anyone much of a reason to be excited about the shift. And I can hear many people saying, screw that, I'll just take the blue pill, thank you, and run out the clock on this life. It's certainly a viable option and choice, and many, many people alive today will do just that. That's the downside, but for those of us that choose to become self-aware, it's not all bad news. On the upside, we will discover that everything and everyone is interconnected. We will realize that all things are known to us. We will come to learn how to consciously create everything in our experience. We will generate the experience of what we would consider to be God's on earth. The veils have thinned between dimensions, between the alive and the dead, between past, present, and future, between terrestrial and extraterrestrial, between essence and physical focus. The amnesia effect we placed on ourselves in order to generate an experience of separation is waning. We will experience true freedom. Imagine the freedom that we enjoy in dreams, without limits, without time constraints, without lack. This is our future. This is our destiny. But it won't be in dreams. It will be within this physical environment. It will not be utopia, but it will be a fucking lot different and better than what we have experienced up to this point in our history. So different that from this perspective, we can scarcely imagine it. I encourage us to imagine it. To dig deep into our ideals that we stuffed down or discarded as childish pipe dreams. To find that child in ourselves that is full of wonder and freedom and finds joy in the sunrise each morning. That cares not, nor worries about jobs, bosses, rent, our 401k, governments, immigrants, presidential candidates, wars, economics. What if? This is the question I encourage us to explore. Because just about any way we finish that question with our absolute ideal can and will become reality. If we can imagine it, we can create it. Imagination is simply the discovery of what hasn't been created yet. But we can't just leap from here to there. The road to self-awareness is a process of self-discovery. And in that self-discovery, there will be trauma. So for those of us who are determined to see this through, where to begin? A very wise teacher said that if the length of a word indicated its importance, one word should be the longest word in our dictionary. Acceptance. Acceptance of ourselves. Acceptance of others. Acceptance of differences. This is the key. This is our golden ticket. This is our yellow brick road. Acceptance will do 95% of the work for us. All we have to do is practice it. Now remember, acceptance isn't approval, it isn't agreement, it isn't participation, it isn't compromise or acquiescence. Acceptance is simply allowing others to be as they wish, and in turn, we will be allowed to be as we wish. Sounds like a pretty fair deal, right? When we discover that we don't have to be affected by what anyone else is doing, that will help considerably. When we stop acting like victims, we will stop being victims. And when we stop being victims, we will also stop being perpetrators. Because we can stop all the wars in the world, but it won't make any difference if we are creating wars in our own households, our neighborhoods, our cities, or on social media. Many people would call this magical thinking. From their perspective, it is. But what the shift has done thus far in its 20 years of objective reality is given some of us enough of a glimpse of how this might work and some tools to practice with that are collectively evidence enough to realize and understand that this is not simply a flight of fancy. It really is happening. There is a flow. There is cooperation. There is interconnection. We do create it all. We don't have to become good enough to get it. We just need to accept ourselves and others and allow ourselves to be it. And that with determination and courage, we can discard all the reasonable and logical arguments as to why we should consider the shift as just cloud talk. Everything I have talked about in my columns so far does work. I chuckle every single day when I consider the irony of my position. My career was in IT. I was a computer engineer. I always joked that the reason I got paid what I did was because I was the guy who would read the manuals that nobody else wanted to. And more than that, my world was ones and zeros, on or off, this or that. Logic, reason, databases, rows and columns, rules and programming languages. That was no accident. I grew up with a father who cultivated and nurtured those abilities in me. And in that, my father was one of the most intelligent and thoughtful people I ever knew. He had a certain gift for logic and reason that I came to admire in the most profound way. And yet this faculty of his was based in a love that was undeniable. He loved the truth. He practiced an admission that he didn't know everything, and a willingness to entertain new information. I learned not to be afraid of changes in my own comprehension. He was my mentor. Not perfect by any means, subject to the times and circumstances of his life. I know he is still involved with me and involved with the shift. I speak to him often. And unlike RFK Jr.'s recent scramble to right himself after saying he spoke to his father and uncle, mine is not a one-way conversation. As I write these columns, I channel my father, the labor relations executive and speechwriter for many, many other General Motors executives of his time, from within his department to the CEOs. They all came to John Malika for his ability to clearly express an idea. I am proud to also represent him as I prepare these columns about a very difficult and little understood subject. I know that comes across when I listen to the audios of what I am writing. The irony is not lost on me when I consider what I am writing about and how it must sound to someone with no background in it. It sounds like absolute lunacy. There is no logical or reasonable basis in which to consider that what I say is true. Now, returning to my father, he was a very religious man, practicing Catholic who always did his very best to be an honorable and decent man. His faith was deep. I watched him when he died. His acceptance of life and his own death was something I will never forget. His faith in the rightness of his own existence and belief that there was more than just an end in death inspires me. He had an incredible ability to believe and have faith in things he could not see or put his hands on. But reason and his acute mind and wit never left him. He died about 2 years before I had my first epiphany and began my process of self-awareness. While he had very strong convictions about his faith and the associated rules of that religion, I have absolutely no doubt that if I were to sit down with him today, that he would understand what I'm getting at, and that he could, at very least, acknowledge what I am saying as a distinct possible explanation for everything. It would not shock him. He would not dismiss me out of hand. And I would proudly express this information to him without fear of ridicule or reprisal. And the best part of it is, if I can explain this to him in a cogent fashion, I can explain it to anyone. It just occurred to me. He is who I write these columns to. If I can express all this in such a way as to accurately present it to John Malika, everyone else is a piece of cake. That is my gift to myself today, recognizing that I am writing for my dad. And that is his gift to me today, being present with me while I explore the shift with you, my readers. Who says you cannot interact with the dead? Who says the dead can't give anything to you? You can view this last part as evidence that the veils are thinning, communicating with the dead. They are participating in the shift also. If I'm participating and my Father is participating with me, then He is participating in the shift. I didn't know I was going to write about my father today. This is a perfect example of what it's like when you peel the onion, more and more to discover about ourselves. The shift is going to completely change how we consider our lives and our existence. It will change so dramatically that we can barely imagine it. And even though the process of shifting and becoming more self-aware will have its associated trauma, we are strong enough to do this. And we have all the energy of the universe to assist us. Not because the universe is something outside of us, but precisely because it is us, or we are it, interconnected with everything and everyone. This shift is our creation. Lean into that when things get tough and sloppy. Dead Fathers is just one place to find inspiration and comfort. Once again, we are never alone. It is worth it. More soon.